Well, today we're going to be shaving these marker lights. And we're also going to get rid of these fuel filler things here as well. I actually almost feel bad about cutting these fenders up, but I'll get over it. Now I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just weld in a cute little rectangle in this thing? Why am I cutting this whole area out like this and trying to make a whole bunch of work for myself? Well, there's a couple different reasons for that. First one is these are stamped in at the factory, and whenever the factory stamps in these things, it always leaves a weird kind of gallop in the metal in the surrounding area. So as soon as I weld my nice little rectangle in there and try and grind it down and whatever, there's always going to be that little weird lump, and so then we're going to have to go over a large area and try to body work it out. Another issue with that is anytime you're welding in kind of something, a small rectangle or circular or square patch in something, the patch itself always kind of acts as a heat sink as you're welding, and it's going to want to pull in and dip down, and then the only way to get that out is to stretch out your weld area, but you can't get in here and stretch out this weld area because it's going into this pre-stamped piece. So what you end up with is something that's dipped down and then high in the surrounding area, so you just got like this weird thing going on, and then you got to try and body work out the entire fender with like an 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch of filler or whatever you got to do, try and make it smooth. Second reason is it don't matter how much filler you put on this, it sits out in the sun and you're going to be able to see a ghost where this was welded in. Now the reason for that is anytime you have a area of strength, like a pre-stamped piece or like a lap welded seam or anything like that, it's going to expand and contract differently in different heating cycles, and it don't matter how much filler you put on that, it's always going to show through the paint. Obviously this is kind of a customization thing. If you're customizing a vehicle and the whole point is to make it look like it came from the factory that way, so if you can see the bodywork and you can see where everything was done through the paint, then like what's the point? It looks terrible. So that's why we just cut that area out. Seems like more work, but in the end it's less work if you want a decent result, and it's not going to show through the paint and look terrible. So this next step is going to be a little controversial, but hear me out. So I cut out a piece of metal here. I think this is 20 gauge, and I made it big enough to fit all the pieces that I need. If I just cut out all the individual pieces, they're very hard to run through the wheel, but if I just cut out a bigger piece of metal and wheel the whole panel, then I'll have a piece that's already pre-stretched, and then I can cut out all my pieces. You don't want to just weld in a flat piece of metal, because every car, unless it's like a Jeep or something like that, is going to have crown in it. Even if it looks flat, it still has crown and shape to it. So if you just weld in a flat piece of metal, all the surrounding metal is going to want to conform to that shape and sink down, and then you've essentially welded in damage into the panel. So that's why we always want to try to put some pre-stretch in our material before we just go ahead and weld it in. If you don't have a wheel, just find something just kind of template the shape of the your panel that you're patching up, and then go out to a junkyard, find something with the same shape to it and cut it out, and then you can just weld it in. Pretty easy way of doing it. These fenders don't have a lot of crown to them, so I'm just using a fairly low crown die in the wheel. Now I want a pretty tight gap on this and a consistent gap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this, I cut it large, you can see, position it in here like so, and then I'll take a small flat bladed screwdriver, or if you're one of them fancy types, you could actually use a proper scribe, and I'll just scribe out a line here, and that's going to give me a super accurate line to cut to, and I'll cut to that line, and then I should have a nice tight fit there. You can see that there, I've got my scribe line in there, and I'll just cut right to that line, and it should, in theory, with a little bit of fiddling around, should just drop right into this hole here. I got both our pieces tack welded in, give or take every inch or so. That's all filled in. You got a fairly consistent fit up here. So now it's time to weld it. So what I'm doing here is a process called hammer welding. That's where I weld a little bit at a time, and then while the weld is still hot, I'm going back in and I'm crushing the weld by using the hammer on dolly technique, and that's stretching the weld back out, and it's controlling the warpage from the welding. As I've mentioned many times before, anytime you weld something, it'll shrink. It doesn't matter what technique you use. When you're welding, it's always going to shrink no matter what you do. Now, so the key is, how do you control that? How do you minimize it? Well, if you're MIG welding this, the way I would minimize it is I would weld about a 1/2 inch at a time, let it completely cool, then go back, weld another 1/2 inch at a time, and just work my way all around. With MIG welding, you want to minimize the amount of shrinking that you do, because it's a lot harder to actually stretch the weld back out, because it's much harder to weld. So that's the technique with MIG welding, is you want to avoid warping. Now with TIG welding, it's a very soft weld, so we can actually go in and we can stretch the weld back out, we can hammer and dolly it. It's very malleable. A lot of times when I'm TIG welding, I'll just weld the whole thing in one pass, let it completely warp, and then come back and hammer and dolly it. In this case, I want to control it as I'm welding, so I'm trying to keep things under control here by actually using this hammer welding process. And the reason for that is there's a lot of body lines and things on this fender, and weird reverse crowns and crowns going this way. So, you know, I don't want to just weld all this at once and have it do crazy things. As I've said, these often act as a heat sink and just pull everything in around it. It's just a vortex of destruction. And so we want to, I guess, control that. You know, it's going to happen, but we want to try to control it. So that's why I'm doing this hammer welding process. And I'm still going to have to go in after and do some more hammer and dolly work when it's done to get it all smooth out. But I just want to keep it as straight as I can while I'm welding it, so I don't, you know, just take this whole thing with me. This fender is basically a brand new original fender. It's taken off when the truck was, you know, only like a year or so old. So I don't want to just like destroy it welding the stuff in, you know. Hammer on dolly technique is when you get that ringing sound, you're crushing the metal in between the hammer and the dolly. The metal, or in this case the weld, has nowhere to go other than to expand, and therefore, you know, counteract the shrinking that happens during the welding process. So that's the whole theory there. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. I just kind of make things up, and then, you know, if you say it with enough confidence, people will believe you. That's what having a YouTube channel is all about. I do have to apply a pretty substantial amount of force upwards with the dolly. You know, you are literally crushing out a weld, so you can't just, if you use too light of pressure, you'll just end up hammering in a big trough into it, and then you gotta try and go and bring that back up, and by then the metal will all be stretched out, and then you'll be stretching it more by trying to bring it back up, and then you have to go back and do a bunch of shrinking and stuff. Best way to learn this is to just pick up a panel and a welder and a hammer, and just go to town, and you'll kind of develop a feel for it. I can sit here for 2 days trying to explain it, and you'll learn more in 10 minutes of messing around than you will watching me trying to explain what I'm doing, and I don't even know what I'm doing half the time. So Got this thing welded out. You can see it stayed reasonably straight, and it is going to need a bunch of fine tuning and stuff, but if you didn't care, you could just clean up these welds and go straight to filler at this stage. There's no major warpage or anything. I did have a little chunk that I had to grind down there. One thing with this is you want to try to get your weld as consistent and low as possible. If you have a big lump or something sticking up, it won't hammer out as nice. So that's kind of another reason why this won't work with a MIG weld, beyond the MIG weld being way too hard for this. It also, if you got all those ropey stuff going on, it's just gonna kind of make a mess if you try doing this with that. But with TIG welding, it works just fine. With gas welding, it would work even better, but not too many people doing that anymore, so that's all right. Now, I'm going to grind these welds down, and then we'll do the final kind of smoothing process, which isn't really necessary, but we're going to do it anyways because we're stupid. And then we'll kind of take a look at what we've achieved here. Okay, so I just knocked this thing down with a grinder real quick. I haven't done anything else to it yet. I just used my 50 grit roll-lock thingy there. And as soon as I started touching the surrounding metal, I stopped. But it actually stayed straight. See, there's really not really any major surface deviations there. We have a bit of a reverse curve going into here. Like I said, there's a lot of different curves on this, which so we didn't want to just weld it all in one pass and make a mess for ourselves. But there's, the weld is still a bit visible here, and I think it is kind of just in a bit here. So I'm just going to keep working this until it's kind of all well, until I lose interest, I guess. But you could easily just go straight to bodywork at this stage, and there'd be absolutely nothing wrong with that. But it's here, and why not? Yes. Okay, well, that's not a flawless repair, but well, we weren't going for flawless. We were just trying to get rid of the marker light there, and I'd say we've done that. Mission accomplished. And we managed to do it without completely destroying this fender that's actually in really good shape. So, all our profile is back. We got this, all the weird shapes are all still happy. I know someone's gonna scream at me for not doing a big radius on the corners. I don't know. I find that's not really necessary. All I did on this is I just drilled a hole, like 5/16 or whatever hole, and that's all the radius I did. I've done them with straight corners. I've done them with radiuses. If you follow all the steps, it comes out no matter what you do. The general consensus is that the whole rounded corners thing is more for building ships and stuff, and as most of you know, square body Chevys generally aren't amphibious vehicles, so we don't got to worry about that too much. And I just prefer not to overthink this stuff any more than it needs to be, so it doesn't hurt to round the corners, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. So we did what we had to do, and we got the job done, and well, I'm not done because I got the other fender to do and I got the gas filler holes to do, but for all intents and purposes, this video is done.